What if I told you that Carl Jung discovered something so dangerous about human consciousness that he kept it hidden in his private clinical notes for years? Something about people who can see what everyone else misses, and why this ability systematically destroys them. Carl Jung said that his most terrifying discovery wasn't about mental illness, psychosis, or even the shadow self. It was about individuals who possessed what he called differentiated perception, people who could read microexpressions like books, sense hidden emotions in every room, and detect psychological patterns that escaped even trained professionals. But here's what Jung discovered that made this so dangerous. These people didn't end up isolated and exhausted because they were mentally unstable. They suffered because seeing everything came with a psychological cost that no one understood, not even Jung himself, until he experienced it firsthand during his own psychological breakdown. Today, I'm going to reveal Carl Jung's most dangerous discovery about the 1% of people who see everything others miss, why Jung believed this rare ability either destroys you completely, or transforms you into something extraordinary. The case that exposed Jung's most dangerous discovery began in 1913, during Jung's own psychological crisis following his devastating break with Freud. A patient walked into his office, a highly introverted, intuitive type who would change everything Jung thought he knew about human consciousness. Carl Jung discovered that this patient possessed what he called undifferentiated intuitive perception. She could walk into any room and immediately sense the psychological atmosphere. Who was lying? Who was harboring secret pain? Who carried hidden resentments? But here's what Jung found absolutely terrifying about her abilities. According to Carl Jung, this patient couldn't engage in small talk because she saw through every social facade. She couldn't maintain friendships because people felt exposed and uncomfortable around her. She couldn't hold employment because her very presence disrupted what Jung called the collective unconscious agreements that keep groups functioning. Carl Jung realized he wasn't treating pathology. He was observing what happens when the unconscious becomes too conscious, when perception becomes so differentiated that it threatens social survival itself. But Jung discovered something even more disturbing. This patient's extraordinary perception seemed impossible to explain through conventional psychology. So Carl Jung began investigating what he would later term participation mystique, a psychological phenomenon where individuals with highly differentiated intuition become overwhelmed by unconscious contents from others. Carl Jung wrote in his Red Book period notes. There are those among us whose psychic apparatus is so finely tuned that they absorb not merely conscious communications, but the entire unconscious atmosphere of their environment. And this is where Jung's discovery becomes truly dangerous. Modern research by Dr. Elaine Aron on highly sensitive persons validates what Carl Jung observed nearly a century ago. Her studies show that roughly 20% of people have heightened sensory and emotional sensitivity. But Carl Jung discovered something far more specific within his psychological typology, the introverted intuitive type, comprising roughly 1% of the population, who don't just feel deeply but perceive unconscious patterns with startling clarity. Carl Jung said these individuals have what he called differentiated intuitive function. Their brains process not just obvious social cues, but unconscious emotional states, repressed content, and psychological patterns that others cannot detect. They see the depression behind forced smiles. They sense the desperation beneath confident presentations. They feel the collective shadow that groups unconsciously agree to ignore. But here's where Jung's discovery becomes absolutely terrifying. Carl Jung wrote, "The danger lies not in the perception itself, but in the psychic isolation it creates." When one sees clearly what others cannot or will not see, one becomes a mirror that society cannot bear to look into. According to Carl Jung, this creates what he called the problem of the superior function, when your greatest strength becomes your greatest burden because it separates you from collective unconscious participation. But Jung discovered the real danger wasn't the perception itself. And what he found next will shock you. Carl Jung discovered that people with highly differentiated perception see others' unconscious contents so clearly that they become targets for what Jung extensively documented as shadow projection, where people unconsciously attack them for reflecting what they refuse to acknowledge in themselves. Carl Jung wrote, "Nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment, and especially on their children, than the unlived life of the parent. But Carl Jung discovered this principle extended to all relationships. When someone's shadow is reflected back through another person's clear perception, the unconscious mind has only two choices: integrate the shadow or attack the mirror. And here's the pattern Jung documented that will make your blood run cold. According to Carl Jung, the person who sees clearly gets blamed for creating the problems they're merely observing. His patients with differentiated intuition experienced this constantly. When they would gently suggest someone seemed troubled, that person would explode at them for being negative or creating drama. When they'd express concern about obvious problems, they'd be accused of being judgmental or manufacturing issues where none existed. Carl Jung realized this wasn't coincidence. It was psychological defense. Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But for most people, it's easier to attack the person reflecting their shadow than to examine what's being reflected. But Jung's most disturbing discovery was still to come. Carl Jung discovered that overwhelming perception manifested differently in different individuals. He identified 4 distinct patterns within the introverted intuitive type, each representing a different way of processing unconscious contents from others. And if you recognize yourself in what I'm about to describe, you'll finally understand why you felt like an alien in your own world. Type 1, the feeling intuitive. Carl Jung said that Type 1, the feeling intuitive, combines introverted intuition with differentiated feeling function. These individuals don't just see what's happening psychologically, they feel it in their own bodies. According to Carl Jung, the feeling intuitive lives in a state of perpetual emotional contagion, experiencing the unlived emotions of everyone in their environment. If this is you, you absorb others' emotions so completely you often can't distinguish between your own feelings and those you've unconsciously absorbed. But there are 3 more types, and one of them might explain everything you've experienced. Type 2, the thinking intuitive. Carl Jung discovered that Type 2, the thinking intuitive, sees psychological patterns and predicts behavioral outcomes with startling accuracy. They could forecast relationship failures, career disasters, and personal breakdowns months before they occurred, not through logical analysis, but through unconscious pattern recognition. Carl Jung noted, they possess an uncanny ability to perceive the logical conclusions of unconscious processes that others cannot yet see. If you're this type, people call you psychic when you're simply seeing inevitable outcomes. Type 3, the sensation intuitive. According to Carl Jung, Type 3, the sensation intuitive, can sense the physical manifestations of psychological states in others. They detect illness before symptoms appear, sense fatigue before it's acknowledged, and feel the bodily tension that indicates emotional distress. Carl Jung wrote, these individuals serve as early warning systems for psychological and physical disease in their environment. But there's one more type that Jung found most dangerous of all. Type 4, the pure intuitive. Carl Jung said that Type 4, the pure intuitive, is the rarest type he encountered. They combine introverted intuition with what he called undifferentiated auxiliary function. They see everything but have difficulty organizing or expressing their perceptions coherently. According to Carl Jung, they live in a state of perpetual overwhelm, receiving vast amounts of unconscious information without adequate psychological structure to process it constructively. If you're this type, you know things you can't explain and feel constantly overwhelmed by information you can't organize. But here's why Jung considered this discovery so dangerous. Carl Jung identified 3 specific dangers that made this discovery so threatening, and if you possess differentiated perception, you need to understand these dangers before they destroy you. Danger 1, collective disruption. Carl Jung wrote, the individual who perceives too clearly threatens the collective agreements upon which social cohesion depends. According to Carl Jung, when someone sees through the shared illusions that hold groups together, the unspoken agreements to ignore certain truths, they become a destabilizing force. Jung discovered that organizations, families, and societies function partly through collective unconscious agreements about what will and won't be acknowledged. The highly perceptive individual inadvertently violates these agreements simply by existing authentically. But the second danger Jung identified is even more devastating. Danger 2, existential isolation. Carl Jung documented how differentiated perception creates what he called the problem of superior function, when your greatest psychological strength becomes the source of your greatest suffering. Carl Jung wrote, "The curse of consciousness is that it cannot be shared with those who do not possess it." The individual becomes an island of awareness in an ocean of unconsciousness. According to Jung, this isolation isn't just social, it's existential. These individuals often report feeling like they're living in a different reality from everyone around them. But the third danger Jung discovered will terrify you. Danger 3, identity dissolution. Most dangerously, Carl Jung found that people who absorb unconscious contents from others often lose contact with their own authentic personality. They become so flooded with external psychological material that they can't distinguish between their own inner world and what they're absorbing from their environment. Carl Jung called this participation mystique, a state where psychological boundaries dissolve and the individual becomes merged with collective unconscious contents. Jung wrote, "The danger is not merely social exile, but psychological annihilation, the complete loss of individual identity in favor of collective possession." But here's where Jung's discovery becomes hopeful. Because unintegrated superior perception posed such dangers, Carl Jung developed what he called the individuation process, a systematic approach to maintaining individual identity while developing conscious relationship with unconscious contents. Carl Jung discovered 3 phases of integration that can transform dangerous perception into evolutionary wisdom. And if you're still listening, you're about to learn the exact process Jung used to save his most perceptive patients from psychological destruction. Phase 1, Recognition. Carl Jung said that Phase 1, recognition and differentiation, requires learning to distinguish between authentic inner experience and unconsciously absorbed external content. According to Carl Jung, the first task is to establish what belongs to you and what belongs to others. Without this discrimination, there can be no individual development. Jung's technique, he instructed patients to spend time in complete solitude daily, allowing absorbed material to settle so they could recognize their own authentic psychological voice. But Phase 2 is where the real transformation begins. Phase 2, Shadow integration. Carl Jung discovered that people who see others' shadows clearly often do so because they haven't integrated their own. The more you deny your own capacity for deception, selfishness, or cruelty, the more disturbed you'll be by seeing these qualities in others. Carl Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves, but only if we have the courage to look inward rather than remaining focused outward." According to Jung, shadow integration means acknowledging that you contain every human quality you observe in others. This doesn't make you a bad person, it makes you a complete person who can see clearly without judgment. But Phase 3 is where Jung's method becomes truly transformational. Phase 3, Conscious participation. The final phase involves what Carl Jung called conscious participation in the collective unconscious, the ability to engage with others' psychological contents without being overwhelmed or losing your individual identity. Carl Jung wrote, "The individuated person can serve as a bridge between conscious and unconscious, helping to make the unconscious conscious in others without sacrificing their own psychological integrity." But Jung studied historical figures to understand the difference between successful integration and psychological breakdown. And what he discovered will shock you. Carl Jung was deeply influenced by Nietzsche's philosophy but observed how his superior perception ultimately led to psychological collapse. Jung wrote about Nietzsche's ability to see through social, religious, and philosophical facades with devastating clarity. However, Carl Jung noted that Nietzsche never learned to integrate these insights constructively. Instead of using his perception in service of healing, he wielded it as a weapon against society. Carl Jung wrote, "Nietzsche possessed extraordinary insight into human nature, but he remained identified with his superior function rather than integrating it into a balanced personality." But Jung found an example of successful integration that offers hope. Carl Jung extensively studied the medieval mystic Meister Eckhart, whom he considered an example of successfully integrated superior perception. Eckhart possessed what Jung called mystical intuition, the ability to perceive spiritual and psychological realities that others could not access. But unlike Nietzsche, Carl Jung discovered that Eckhart channeled his insights into compassionate service. Jung wrote, Eckhart transformed his superior perception into wisdom that could nourish others without overwhelming them. He saw clearly but spoke in ways that invited understanding rather than resistance. But Jung's most revealing case study was his own integration journey. Most significantly, Carl Jung documented his own struggle with overwhelming perception during what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, from 1913 to 1919, recorded in the Red Book. Carl Jung wrote, I was menaced by a psychosis and was saved only by my ability to understand what was happening to me through my work with patients. According to Jung, his superior perception of unconscious contents, both his own and others, nearly destroyed him until he learned to integrate these experiences consciously. And here's Jung's breakthrough that saved his life. Carl Jung's breakthrough came when he realized that his overwhelming perceptions weren't pathological, but evolutionary. They represented consciousness attempting to evolve beyond current collective limitations. This realization transformed Jung's approach to patients with similar gifts. He discovered that individuals with superior perception often face isolation, making it crucial to find what he called the few who understand. Carl Jung wrote, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But this privilege cannot be realized in isolation. It requires witnessing by those capable of recognizing authenticity. But Jung identified specific types of relationships essential for survival. Carl Jung discovered 3 essential types of relationships for the highly perceptive individual, and if you can't find these connections, your gift will likely destroy you. Type 1, fellow individuated persons. Carl Jung wrote, the individuated person recognizes another individuated person immediately. There is a quality of presence, an authenticity that cannot be fabricated. Type 2, those engaged in individuation. Jung observed that people actively engaged in their own individuation process can often handle superior perception without defensiveness. Type 3, natural containers. Carl Jung identified individuals who have what he called natural container function, the ability to hold psychological content without being overwhelmed by it. But Jung developed specific indicators for identifying safe relationships. Carl Jung developed specific indicators for identifying safe relationships. According to Jung, safe people ask genuine questions about your observations rather than immediately defending against them. They can acknowledge their own contradictions without shame. They demonstrate what Jung called psychological mindedness, genuine interest in inner reality. But Jung emphasized a crucial warning about revealing your abilities. Carl Jung taught a careful process for revealing perceptive abilities. Begin with small, gentle observations. Notice their response pattern to feedback. Assess whether they become defensive or curious. Gradually increase depth based on their demonstrated capacity. Carl Jung emphasized, the goal is not to find people who accept everything you see, but to find people who can engage with your perceptions as valuable contributions to understanding rather than threats to their self-image. But Jung discovered that integrated superior perception serves a larger purpose. Because integrated superior perception serves both individual and collective development, Carl Jung viewed successful individuation as essential not just for personal well-being but for the evolution of human consciousness itself. Carl Jung wrote, the individual has always been the carrier of the living spirit, the one who brings about the change in society. According to Jung, individuals who successfully integrate superior perception become what he called culture carriers, people who help consciousness evolve. But Jung identified 4 stages of transformation. Carl Jung discovered 4 stages of transformation from dangerous perception to evolutionary wisdom. Stage 1, recognition without overwhelm, learning to acknowledge your abilities without being crushed by them. Stage 2, integration without isolation, using your perception constructively while maintaining relationships. Stage 3, service without sacrifice, your perception becomes a gift you offer rather than a burden you carry. Stage 4, legacy without attachment, using your perception to contribute to collective consciousness evolution. But Jung warned about specific pitfalls that can derail this transformation. Carl Jung documented the most common ways individuals derail their own transformation process. Pitfall 1, the inflation trap. Jung wrote extensively about psychological inflation, when individuals become identified with their superior function rather than integrating it consciously. Pitfall 2, the withdrawal justification. Jung documented cases where individuals used their superior perception to justify complete withdrawal from society. Pitfall 3, the helper's trap. Jung observed that some highly perceptive individuals become addicted to being needed. Pitfall 4, the overwhelm return. Even successfully integrated individuals can regress during stress. But Jung developed ongoing practices for maintaining healthy integration. Carl Jung developed ongoing practices for maintaining healthy integration, regular solitude for distinguishing your own psychological contents from absorbed material. Conscious choice about when and with whom to engage perceptive abilities. Ongoing shadow work to prevent projection of your own unconscious contents. Carl Jung wrote, "The integrated person does not achieve perfection, but learns to dance consciously with their own psychological complexity." But Jung understood superior perception within a larger evolutionary context. According to Carl Jung, people with superior perception serve as what he called consciousness pioneers, individuals whose psychological development precedes collective readiness. Carl Jung wrote, "What appears in the individual first as psychological insight later manifests in the collective as cultural transformation." The individual serves as a laboratory for consciousness experiments that will eventually benefit the whole. But Jung believed modern highly perceptive individuals might be sensing specific patterns. Carl Jung believed that in the modern era, highly perceptive individuals might be sensing psychological patterns that explain collective behavior, environmental and social unsustainability before it becomes obvious, spiritual possibilities beyond current religious frameworks, and collective shadow contents that need conscious integration. Carl Jung said, "The sensitive individual feels the collective problems first and most intensely. Their personal symptoms often reflect what the entire culture needs to address." But here's Jung's crucial insight about service. Carl Jung's crucial insight was that superior perception serves evolution best when it's integrated consciously rather than suffered unconsciously. The goal isn't to be a martyr to consciousness, but to be a bridge between what is and what's becoming. Carl Jung wrote, "The individuated person serves the collective not by sacrificing their individuality, but by developing it so completely that it becomes a gift to the whole." And at the highest level of development. At the highest level of development, Carl Jung discovered that individuals with superior perception hold their abilities lightly, seeing clearly without attachment to others, accepting what they see, perceiving deeply without compulsion to fix everything they observe. Carl Jung called this, the transcendent function, the ability to serve consciousness evolution naturally without forcing or preaching, simply by embodying more conscious ways of being. But remember Jung's patient from 1913? Remember Carl Jung's patient from 1913, the introverted intuitive who came to him during his own psychological crisis? After 3 years of working with Jung's individuation process, her life transformed completely. She learned to distinguish between her own psychological contents and what she absorbed from others. She found work as a counselor where her differentiated perception helped troubled individuals. She built relationships with people who valued her insights rather than fearing them. Most importantly, she stopped experiencing her superior perception as a curse and began understanding it as what Carl Jung called a gift requiring conscious development. And here's what Jung wrote about her transformation. Carl Jung wrote about her transformation, "The patient learned not to see less, but to see more wisely, not to perceive less deeply, but to engage more consciously with what she perceived. Her gift remained intact, but her relationship to it became integrated rather than overwhelming." According to Carl Jung, this represents his most dangerous discovery, that some individuals are born with consciousness that exceeds collective readiness. And this advanced perception will either destroy them through isolation and overwhelm, or transform them into exactly what humanity needs for its psychological evolution. But here's Jung's final message to highly perceptive individuals. Carl Jung said that your superior perception isn't a malfunction in your psychological makeup, it's an advanced feature of consciousness development. You're not broken because you see everything others miss. You're psychologically ahead of your time. According to Carl Jung, the question isn't whether you should suppress your perception to fit in with collective unconsciousness. The question is whether you'll develop the individuation skills necessary to integrate your perception consciously. Carl Jung's individuation method offers a path from dangerous isolation to conscious service, from overwhelming perception to integrated wisdom, from psychological curse to evolutionary contribution. Carl Jung discovered that you were born to see everything, not to suffer in silence, but to serve consciousness evolution. The world needs your insights, but it needs them delivered with the integration, wisdom, and strategic awareness that transform dangerous perception into cultural medicine. Your gift is not your burden, Carl Jung said. Your unconscious relationship to your gift is your burden. Learn to integrate it consciously and you become exactly what Jung believed highly perceptive individuals were meant to be, consciousness pioneers preparing humanity for psychological development that is inevitable but not yet obvious. Carl Jung's most dangerous discovery wasn't that some people see everything. According to Jung, it's that most people who see everything never learn to use what they see wisely. Carl Jung said the danger isn't in the perception itself, but in failing to develop conscious relationship with extraordinary abilities. You are not too much for this world, Jung discovered. You are exactly what consciousness evolution requires, once you learn to wield your perception as consciously as Carl Jung learned to wield his. The danger of seeing everything, according to Carl Jung, isn't that you see too much. It's that you might never learn to see with the integration and wisdom your gifts demand. If you recognize yourself in Carl Jung's description of the highly perceptive individual, you're part of a rare psychological type that Jung believed essential for consciousness evolution. Carl Jung discovered that your individuation journey connects you with others walking the same path. You're not alone in this extraordinary psychological territory that Jung mapped for future generations of consciousness pioneers. Remember, Carl Jung said that what appears impossible to integrate today becomes the foundation for tomorrow's psychological evolution. Your struggle to integrate superior perception isn't just personal, it's evolutionary. The question Carl Jung would ask you is this: will you use his discoveries to transform your dangerous gift into conscious wisdom? Or will you remain trapped in the isolation and overwhelm that destroys most people who see everything? Carl Jung's most dangerous discovery offers you a choice: destruction through unconscious suffering, or transformation through conscious integration. The path Jung mapped is waiting for you. The only question is whether you're ready to walk it. The path Jung mapped is waiting for you. The only question is whether you're ready to walk it. Thank you so much for staying with me through this exploration. If you found value in today's discussion, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who might benefit from it.